And there we go, that was another month of the year just gone. February and March have just gone so quickly. It's like I blinked and the entire month was suddenly over. Similarly to February, I didn't watch loads of stuff in March. The majority of what I watched this month was actually like stuff I watched for my podcast, the Sunday Movie Marathon. But the films that I didn't watch for that, I will talk maybe a little bit more in depth about than usual. I guess we'll just see how the conversation goes. But yeah, I basically just watched stuff for the podcast, and that was really about it. I spent a lot of time working on stuff for my channel, and also I was doing like a song cover every single day, which took up a lot of my time, so I haven't really had a lot of time to watch films. And I also kind of just felt a bit fatigued when it came to watching films as well. But over like the last week, I've definitely gotten back into watching them, and I watched a few outside of the ones that I watched for the podcast. Maybe next month will be a little bit more busy, but I guess we'll just see. Anyway, let's just jump into it. Starting, of course, we're going daily, so starting on the 1st all the way up to the 31st. So the first film I watched this month was Bottle Rocket, directed by Wes Anderson. This is of course Wes Anderson's first movie, and this is my second time watching it. Right from the get-go, like early on in his career, he definitely was incredibly sharp when it came to his writing abilities. The comedy throughout is really great, and I think the characters are both very interesting to watch. But you can definitely tell that he is not super confident yet. Like a lot of the like quirky visuals you'd expect from Wes Anderson films aren't really here that much. That's something that would come more in Rushmore, a second film. But just like all of Wes Anderson's films, this is one that's incredibly charming and filled with a lot of heart and passion. This is definitely one of the darker, more serious movies that he's done, but it's definitely very comedic at the same time. I love both of the Wilson brothers in the film. They're both really funny in it, and I think they're both great, well-written characters. And as you'd expect from Wes Anderson, the soundtrack, comprising of mostly like 60s, 70s rock music, is all really great. It definitely does feel like a Wes Anderson film, but this is probably the least Wes Anderson-y of all of his films. Like, it's not quite as quirky or unique or completely original like all of his other movies. I do think this is probably his weakest film, but that doesn't mean I don't like it at all, because I do really like this film a lot. He's probably like my second favorite director, I'd say, and I do enjoy everything he's done. This is just the film I think I like the least out of everything, but I'm still going to give it a 7 out of 10. I do enjoy it a lot, and the Criterion Blu-ray looks beautiful. Then over the next 3 days, I watched 3 films for the Sunday Movie Marathon podcast, those being The Grand Budapest Hotel, also directed by Wes Anderson, Lion, and Inception. Go listen to the podcast to hear me talk about them more. On the 5th, I watched the film Once, directed by John Carney for the first time. This is just an absolutely beautiful movie. It's basically like a musical romance sort of film about 2 musicians who like meet each other, and like they're both singer-songwriters, and they start to collaborate and they make music together, which kind of reflects the story of their slowly building love, but at the same time they're both very conflicted because they're both basically in relationships and they both have love for the people they're with as well. It's a very realistic depiction of attraction and love, where it doesn't depict it in like an incredibly cliched, cheesy way where it's like they're both in relationships and they find each other and they fall in love and they get together at the end. It's not like that at all, and it's very conflicted constantly throughout, and I think that's what makes it feel just so real and interesting to watch. So much of the movie kind of encapsulates that feeling of like listening to music and sharing experiences with people and connecting through it, and I think that's something that really related to me and really hit me deeply, considering how big music is a part of my life. The 2 leads, Glenn Hansard and Markita Iglova, I don't know if I pronounced that anywhere near correctly. They weren't actually like actors before doing the film. They both came from musical backgrounds, and because of that, the music in the film is just incredible. They did form a band and they like wrote a lot of new music together and like performed a lot of the songs in the film, but the music and the songs in this film are just all incredibly well written. I love every single song in this film, and I've listened to all the songs like constantly on loop ever since watching the film. They of course did win an Oscar for the song Falling Slowly, which is an incredible song which I highly recommend checking out. This is just a film that hit me in a very personal and beautiful way. I just found the entire entire experience incredibly sweet, wholesome, and just very powerful. It's a film that maybe on a second watch I won't like anywhere near as much, and maybe in the future, like, my rating's gonna go down, but like, I watched it almost a month ago and I still think this is like a 10 out of 10 movie. I really adore this movie and I cannot recommend it enough. On the 6th, I watched two completely different movies in every single way, starting with Kung Fu Panda 2. I was very surprised watching Kung Fu Panda 2. Like I said before, that I do like the first Kung Fu Panda movie, but I'm not like head over heels in love with it. I think it's a very flawed movie. But Kung Fu Panda 2 is genuinely really great. Like, I was not expecting it to be so good. I've heard nothing but great things about it. The YouTuber I Hate Everything, like, genuinely considers it one of his favorite films. I'm pretty sure he's got it like rated as a 5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So I did go in, like, I had high expectations, but at the same time, a lot of the people who loved this movie also really liked the first one. So I did kind of think, oh, maybe I won't like it as much. But I really loved this film. It was just an incredibly well done movie. The animation is all fantastic. The film has great action. It definitely dials back on the comedy a lot more, and then instead like switches it with like this incredibly deep and really powerful heart and emotion. Like, this is genuinely a very powerful and emotional movie somehow. Like, I never expected a film called Kung Fu Panda 2 to like genuinely bring me to tears, but by the end of this film I was like bawling at the ending. It's just a very powerful and unique movie. There's something very comforting throughout watching it. I completely understand why everyone seems to love this movie, because it's such an incredibly well done film. Like, this film is better than it really had any right to be. It's weird that like DreamWorks seem to do like really good sequels for some reason. Like I mean, I am not head over heels in love with Shrek, but I think Shrek 2 is genuinely one of the best animated films of the 2000s. How to Train Your Dragon 2 is pretty much a masterpiece. Like, it's crazy that they take these pretty good movies and like do incredible sequels to them, although How to Train Your Dragon 1 was also incredible as well. I would highly recommend checking out Kung Fu Panda 2, even if you're not a fan of the first movie, because I feel like this just does everything right that the first movie did wrong. It's just a massive improvement in literally every single way, and I'm glad that they made it much more serious and didn't talk down to kids. Like, it's a very dark and serious movie. There's very little comedy in there, but even when there is comedy, it actually works incredibly well. Like, I don't think there was a single joke in this film that didn't make me laugh, which isn't something I can't say about the first film. But yeah, I loved this movie and I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. And the other film I watched was Heat, directed by Michael Mann. Yeah, like I said, two like polar opposite movies. Heat is one of those films that has been recommended to me for years, but I'd never got around to watching. But I eventually was like, I'm in the mood for like a 3-hour crime action sort of film, so I thought, you know what, why not give this a chance? And yeah, this film is just incredible. There are definitely some issues with it, especially like in some of the green screen work, like being quite dated and not looking very good. But if you could look past that, and which I did, I think that's kind of like minor nitpicky. This film is just this incredibly grandiose, epic crime drama, which is just, even despite like being 3 hours long, it just like flies by. There's just a constant feeling of tensity throughout. The film is incredibly well paced. The action is all great. Of course, the acting is fantastic. Al Pacino, Val Kilmer, Robert De Niro, so many great actors in the film, and they all bring their A game to the performances. Al Pacino is hilarious in the movie. He takes the idea of being over the top and like just runs with it. Like, if you think him in Scarface is quite over the top, this is like that times 10. He is just so entertaining to watch, and he's clearly just having a blast in the film, just going crazy. There's so many hilarious moments in the film which I think are intentionally funny. Like, there's quite a famous one where he's like talking about someone having a great ass and someone having their head straight up it. Stuff like that. He's just so hilarious in those scenes. Robert De Niro plays a really great villain in the film, which is cool to see because I don't think I've really ever seen him play a villain character in a film, at least not in anything good. Michael Mann does a really great job of showing the good and bad sides of like the people who are meant to be right and wrong. Like obviously you got Al Pacino as a police officer and Robert De Niro as like a crime boss, and he does a great job of making both the characters very likable, showing like a very light human side to them, but also showing just how flawed they are. And I think that's what really makes this film so special and takes it away from what could have just been like quite a generic crime thriller. If you like these like really long epic crime movies, then I cannot recommend this enough. This is just a fantastic movie and I cannot wait to watch it again. I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube for free, so like I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was on there at one point, so I definitely recommend checking out on there at some point, and I'm gonna give this a 10 out of 10. On the 8th, I watched the film, but I'm not gonna give it a rating because I don't know what it was about the film. I think I was just in a weird headspace, so I couldn't really pay attention to the film, so I didn't really get anything out of it, and I didn't enjoy it, I didn't dislike it. I was just kind of in this weird state of I wasn't taking anything in. That was Once Upon a Time in the West, directed by Sergio Leone. I really love Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy, so I do want to give this another chance when I'm in a better frame of mind. I think maybe in the next month I'm going to try it again, and hopefully I get a lot more out of it. But it seemed like a really good movie. I just, for some reason, I couldn't take anything in. But of course, if you like Western movies, it's like an essential Western to watch. I can definitely understand why a lot of people consider it to be great, even if like I didn't take anything in. So like I said, I'm not going to rate it. I need to rewatch it before giving it a proper review, so maybe that'll be on one of these videos in the future. So I watched some more films for the podcast. Those included Kangaroo Jack. Yeah, that was a huge mistake. Four Lions and Andrei Tarkovsky's Nostalgia. Listen to the podcast to hear me talk about them. On the 10th, I rewatched the Simpsons movie. I've been watching through all the Simpsons episodes on Disney Plus, and I was like going in order, and I was like at the point where it gets to like in between seasons where the film came out, I watched the film. I've seen this film quite a lot of times. I was a huge fan of it when I was like 10 or 11 when it came out, so I used to watch it like constantly, but I don't think I've watched it since then. So going back and watching it, I wasn't sure whether I'd love it or whether it'd be like a film where it's like not aged well, and I like couldn't believe how well this holds up. Obviously they worked with so many of the original writers from the show, meaning that this is funnier than anything that like came out in the 2000s from The Simpsons. Like watching this, I was like, I have laughed more in this hour-and-a-half movie than I have at any episode combined since like season 12. That doesn't mean the film's perfect. Of course, there is a lot of bits that don't really work. There are a lot of jokes that upon repeated like viewings are definitely not quite as funny as I imagine they were when it first came out. There are some moments that are quite dated, like seeing Green Day at the beginnings, like very dated watching it now, which is a shame because so much of the film feels timeless like a lot of the best Simpsons episodes do. But this is like pretty much as good as a Simpsons movie could be. Like the animation is really great. The voice acting is of course fantastic. The characters are all incredibly fun to watch, and I love what they do with Bart and like his relationship with Homer, and the way they make it such a like a huge emotional part of the film. And this is a very like emotionally powerful film, especially if you're a huge fan of The Simpsons. Of course, I'm not going to say this is an incredible perfect movie that everyone should watch, but I genuinely really loved this movie, and I'm glad that I got to rewatch it again. I can imagine I'll rewatch it again like very soon because it's just a lot of fun to watch and really funny still. So I'm going to give The Simpsons movie an 8 out of 10. On the 12th, I rewatched Greta Gerwig's Little Women, and I still really love this film. It's just one of those films that is incredibly warm and charming to watch. There's obviously emotional parts towards the end. There's like a couple bits that are genuinely really sad, but for the most part, this is just a really sweet, wholesome and heartwarming movie. Watching the film, you can really tell that you're watching a film directed by someone who loves and cares about the source material so much. Every actor in the film is incredible, and I think they really bring the characters to life in an incredibly powerful way. I haven't seen any other adaptations of the book, and I haven't even read the book, but I recently watched a video that broke down all the different adaptations and compared them. I can't remember who it was by, but it was a pretty good video where they showed a lot of clips from the films and like compared them, like pretty integral scenes that obviously are in every single version of the film. And I definitely felt in every single way this film did it so much better. I love the way that this film is basically this really sweet and grand feminist statement that I think works incredibly well. Greta Gerwig is a great actress, but I think she is an incredible director, and I cannot wait to see what she does next. Pretty sure her next film's that Barbie movie with Noah Baumbach, so that should be interesting, I guess. I'm definitely more open to it after the fact that I loved Lady Bird and Little Women. Like, I feel like if it was any other director, I'd be very hesitant. But yeah, Little Women, it's just such a good movie. I really love it. It just makes me feel so warm and happy, even in its more emotional moments. And I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. On the 15th, I watched 3 movies. Yeah, that day I didn't really do anything except for watch films, I guess. Starting with that new Billie Eilish documentary, The World's a Little Blurry, for Apple TV. I'm a big fan of Billie Eilish, as anyone who's watched the channel before will know. Like, I put her debut album as my favorite album of 2019, and I stick by that. It's a really great album still. So I definitely found it very interesting watching this documentary, getting to really delve into her as a person and just seeing her in a way that I've not seen before. I do really enjoy music documentaries like this, where it like shows a different side of the musician and like helps you get to know them as a person rather as just like a character as a musician or anything like that. There are a lot of points throughout where the way it's like structured feels like almost like a coming of age drama, which is really strange. Like, there's a lot of points where it like very much could not be a documentary, and I think it would still be very entertaining. It like does a great job of showing how hard it is being a teenager, especially like not only in today's world, but when you're like as big as she is and like everyone is looking at you and paying attention to you as you're like growing up. Like, I can't imagine how difficult that is, and the film does a great job of just showing how hard it can be. There are many moments that are very intimate and personal, sometimes a little bit too much. Like, there's a few bits where I was like, I really don't think we should be like watching this right now. Like, I felt like I was invading her privacy at points. But for the most part, I think this film really delves into her as a person in an incredibly interesting and entertaining way. My favorite bits of the film, I think, are actually like very early on in the film, like just showing Billy and Phineas like just sitting in their room writing the album together. Like, there's just a lot of points where you see them like slowly developing songs and recording them, and I just found all that stuff really fascinating. I do love the like coming of age stuff, like seeing her develop as a person like while she's on tour and slowly getting bigger and bigger till she's like the biggest thing on the planet. I found that stuff very entertaining. I do think the film is a little bit long and could have been like 15-20 minutes shorter, but I do think it's a very good documentary, and if you're a fan of Billie Eilish, this is like essential viewing. I think I got it rated as like an 8 on Letterboxd, and maybe I'd give it like a 7. Like, it's like in the middle between like a high 7 and very low 8. I do really love the documentary, and I recommend checking it out, but like I've said before on this channel, fuck Apple TV. I also rewatched Who Framed Roger Rabbit for the first time since I was a kid. This was a film that I loved growing up, so I was really looking forward to rewatching it. It's been like a film that I've been meaning to rewatch for ages. Like, I've had the DVDs since I was a kid. I don't think this film is incredible anymore. I don't think it holds up as well as I was hoping it would, but that doesn't mean it's a bad movie, because it is a very good film still. The technical mastery of the film is still astounding to this day. There's like a few parts where it does look a little bit dated, but the way they managed to blend animation and like live action, especially in the 80s, it's just mind-blowing how they managed to get a lot of the effect work in the film, the the way it is. There are some great designs throughout, and I just love the idea of having this big crossover between like the Warner Brothers cartoons, like the Looney Tunes stuff, and the classic Disney cartoons. This isn't something that would ever happen today. Like, there's no way the two studios would be able to collaborate that much, and like, there's no way Warner Brothers would let Disney use their characters like they do in this film nowadays, which is a shame. It's a shame we'll never get a film like this again, because I just love the idea of the film, this like noir film set in Toontown, where all the cartoons from like the Looney Tunes and Disney stuff come together and live together in harmony, but there's like deep crime that obviously we don't see in the films, because like it's kind of like the dark side of Hollywood. Like, we see all the glamorous stuff, but we never see what's actually going on behind the scenes, and I just love the idea of them basically making a film almost satirizing that. I also really appreciate that this is a film that is quite dark for a kids movie. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you would never be able to do in a kids movie now. Like, there's so much swearing, there's so much like just moments of characters smoking and drinking alcohol that happens so much. There's loads of sexual innuendos throughout the film. Some of them are subtle, some of them aren't, like to the point where even as a kid I understood what they were talking about. It creates something that is very unique, but is of course of its time. Like, I can see kids nowadays like looking at this and thinking, oh no, that's an old movie, that doesn't hold up now. But I do think it holds up in a lot of ways. Like, Christopher Lloyd in the film is one of the most terrifying villains in a kid movie ever. Like, I remember as a kid he used to like scare the shit out of me, and rewatching it I was like, he is so terrifying. Like, how did they get away with a character this fucking terrifying in a kids film? This feels like a film that from a time that's sadly long forgotten, and I do like it a lot. I don't think it's an incredible movie, I don't think it holds up as well as I was hoping it to, but this is still a really fun movie that I hope one day I can show my kids. So I'm going to give Who Framed Roger Rabbit a 7 out of 10. Maybe I'll watch it again in the future and I'll actually end up turning back around on it, but yeah, for now I think it's a 7. I also watched the film for the Sunday Movie Marathon podcast this day, and then I'll watch 2 more over the next few days. So the one I watched on the 15th was Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and over the next couple of days I watched Prisoners and Eraserhead. On the 20th I watched Casablanca for the first time. Yeah, this is like one of those classic movies that everyone is constantly saying is like a rite of passage for film fans that I just never got around to. It's a film I've owned on DVD for a long time, but I just kept putting it off because I was like, oh, it's a 40s like romance movie. I feel like it would be quite dated. And finally watching it, I was surprised at how well it holds up. There are so many iconic moments in this film that any film fan will probably like recognize from being parodied or referenced in like everything. I was actually surprised at how much of this movie I like knew, even though I've never seen the film. Of course I knew things like the final line of the film and like here's looking at you kid and that sort of thing, but there was like so many moments in the film where I was like, oh yeah, I've seen that like parodied, or I've heard that line referenced in something else. And it's easy to understand why, because this is an incredibly well written movie. This is just a constantly engrossing, interesting, and quite beautiful movie. I love the handling of the Nazis and like this almost conspiracy sort of edge running throughout. I found that stuff really fascinating. And of course, like a large bulk of the film is about this romance that happened in the past. Now these two people are coming together and having to like put their differences aside to help each other out. And I found that stuff just really beautiful and sweet. All the performances are really great, and there was never a point when watching this film where I was like, this film's aged badly or anything. This is an incredibly well aged movie. I can see some people who aren't a fan of old films looking at this and going, oh, it's just an old film, like it doesn't hold up well. But I think this is a film that really does hold up well. I really do understand why this is like one of the most important movies ever made, and I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it. It's just an incredibly well made movie that I really loved a lot, and I'm looking forward to rewatching again sometime in the future. So I'm going to give this film an 8 out of 10. On the 21st, I watched Zack Snyder's Justice League. Yeah, fuck that film. I reviewed it on this channel, I did a video about it, and I also reviewed it on the Sunday Movie Marathon podcast. So go watch the video or listen to the podcast to hear me talk about it more, but yeah, not a fan. On the 21st, I rewatched Rocky for like the third or fourth time now. All of the Rocky movies were on Amazon Prime, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna watch them all over like the next week. And I only watched the first one, and now they're not on Prime anymore. I did end up buying all the Blu-rays, so I'm looking forward to rewatching them all at some point. But Rocky is just a classic movie. This is like one of the most inspirational like underdog stories ever put on film. The writing is all really great. I love just how dark and gritty the film looks. It very much looks like an independent 70s movie. You can definitely tell it's like made mostly on a fairly small budget. Sylvester Stallone is incredible in this movie, and he also writes the script, which is surprising because this is an incredibly well written script. I can completely understand how this film like just skyrocketed Stallone into like one of the biggest stars in the world, and I just think the character of Rocky is this incredibly entertaining character to watch, and I think he's one of just the best characters in cinema. A large majority of the film is actually less like a boxing movie and more a romance movie between Rocky and Adrian, and their relationship is really sweet and heartwarming. I think they're like one of the greatest screen couples ever. I just love the way they get together and their relationship slowly develops, and like they're two very almost reclusive characters who come together and bring like this confidence to each other and make him more outgoing, especially Adrian, who's like this very shy, quiet person who like when she gets with Rocky becomes more confident and outspoken, and I just find all of that stuff just so sweet and heartwarming. This is just a film that constantly pumps me up, just constantly makes me feel really happy, even in like some of the darker moments. I'm just constantly just enjoying every moment that happens, and it's just, it really just, anytime I watch it, I just feel like I can accomplish anything. It just constantly inspires me. This is just one of my favorite movies. I highly recommend the film if you've not watched it, although I will say if you like going in expecting like a film full of boxing, this isn't what the film's about at all. Like, boxing is such a small part of the actual film. Like, there's only like 10 minutes of boxing throughout the entire thing, and I think a lot of people look at it and like write it off because they're like, oh, it's just a film about guys punching each other. That doesn't sound interesting. But this film is just a deep drama about someone who just wants to be better than he is and wants to prove himself and will go super far to make sure that happens. And I think it's just an incredibly well written, well acted, and incredibly well directed movie that I really love. I'm gonna give this one an 8 out of 10. It's like a very high 8, like possibly a 9. I don't know. I think I'd stick with an 8, but I could potentially give it a 9 on like even more rewatches. From the 22nd to the 25th, I watched 3 films for the podcast, those being The Truman Show, 12 Monkeys, and Dead Man. Go listen to that episode to hear us talk about that. On the 26th, I watched Bad Trip, the new Eric Andre hidden camera Netflix movie, and I fucking loved this movie. I'm a huge fan of Eric Andre's brand of comedy. I love the hidden camera stuff he does. He constantly finds ways to do like these very out there, controversial, and at times quite aggressive hidden camera stunts, and I think they're most of the time really funny. And I think he does a fantastic job of taking that idea and creating a film with it. Like, I think hidden camera movies can be like quite problematic. Like, the problem with it is like it's possible that the film will not really work. It will just be like a bunch of hidden camera stunts with like this lazy story written around it. That's kind of how I felt with Bruno, and that was also how I felt about that Jackass film Bad Grandpa, which Bad Trip actually reminds me a lot of. But the film does a great job of basically taking the hidden camera format and using it as a way to create this incredibly hilarious satire on just like generic comedy tropes. Like, the whole point of the film is basically it's a pretty average generic comedy like road trip story about a guy driving across the country to get a girl with like a bad guy chasing after him, and they do a great job of taking all like the tropes that you would expect from that sort of film and like pushing them into real life, so you get like real life reactions, and it works so incredibly well. I laughed so much at this film. I can't remember the last time I laughed this much at a film. I'm hoping it holds up on a second viewing because I feel like it could possibly, like, I'll rewatch it and I'm like, oh, this isn't very good. But I think, like, just the stuff they managed to get away with, the just general scope of what they managed to achieve, like, in this format is just mind-blowing. There's so many points where I'm like, how did they possibly pull that off? And I feel like that is something that will keep the film interesting even for people who don't really find it funny. I just think it's a really, really well-made movie, and I'm gonna give it, I give it like a low 8, high 7. Like, I just loved it a lot, and I highly recommend checking it out. It's on Netflix. So yeah, if you've got Netflix, go watch it. And then for the rest of the month, I rewatched all of the Indiana Jones movies. And by rewatched, I mean I rewatched the first 2 and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and discovered halfway through The Last Crusade, I had never actually watched it. I had an absolute blast with all 4 of these movies. Even the Temple of Doom, which I do like but I don't love, and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which I'm not really a big fan of at all. I just had so much fun spending time with this character and just seeing the wacky, like, crazy, ridiculous adventures he got on. The action is all great throughout. There's some great set pieces throughout all 4 of the movies, even if I think Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is just ruined by how much CGI is in the film. But I enjoy these movies a lot. I'm going to be talking about them at some point in the future. I've, like, got a load of notes, so I'm gonna do a review, like a series review of all 4 movies, so stay tuned for that. Hopefully that will be out in the next few weeks. So I did watch, like, a few TV shows throughout the month, and by a few I mean like 3, I guess. Like, of course, like always, I watched some Simpsons. I didn't watch much of the Simpsons. I think after the movie I like watched a few like old episodes like a couple weeks later, but that's about it. I've not watched any more of that yet, but I will get back onto it. I'm hoping to eventually have watched every episode so I can do this video I've been planning to do for like 5 or 6 years, talking about how bad The Simpsons is nowadays. So yeah, hopefully that will be out like in 10 years time. But I did watch WandaVision, the new Marvel MCU show on Disney Plus, and I did enjoy it quite a lot. That was one I talked about on the Sunday Movie Marathon. We did like a whole episode dedicated to it. I watched James Acaster's Repertoire Netflix specials, which are really fucking funny. James Acaster is a great comedian. He's just so funny, and like every single one of the specials in this like series is just so hilarious. Every single one of the specials are like one of the most consistently hilarious and witty stand-up specials I've ever seen. Like, James Acaster is just constantly at the top of his game, and he's just one of the best comedians around. And if you've not watched the specials yet, you are really doing yourself a disservice, because it's just so hilarious. And I also watched the first series of the show Bones, which we talked about on episode 25 of the Sunday Movie Marathon. This video ended up going on far longer than I was expecting to, because I think I went a bit far with some of the like film reviews and talked a bit much, but I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm enjoying doing these film diary videos, and hopefully next month there'll be like more films to talk about, and if that is the case, I will talk about them like nowhere near as much as in this video. But yeah, I've got a lot of videos planned. Obviously the OK Human Weezer review will be out this month, and I am planning on watching the next phase, or the next half of phase 3, like in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully by the end of April, the final MCU phase video will be out. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.